Hey guys, Poro here with another video, this time for the final role ranking video prior to the 2026 season. We'll be looking at support, and I'm really excited to show you guys what I ended up going with because I think out of all of the 5 roles, support is definitely one that's the most up in the air. There's a lot of different players that could have gone into a lot of different places on the list, and I definitely expect that there will be more overall disagreement with this one than there would have been for the other 4. At this point, I'm assuming most of you here have seen at least one of the other 4 videos, so you all saw the intro for those videos, so we're gonna jump right into the honorable mentions. There are some specific ones I want to point out that people might disagree with or would be surprised to see here. The first one would be Kaiwing. I do think that Kaiwing should definitely be the best support in the CB LoL, and it's also true that he was the primary shot caller for a team that made it to quarterfinals at Worlds, so that's very impressive. However, I personally have not been huge on Kaiwing for the last couple of years. I think he is a support who can over-engage a lot. I think he tends to make a lot of game-losing plays. He can also make a lot of game-winning plays, but when there's a player who's that coin flippy, I tend to not have a super high opinion of them. I did not think in LCP 2025 that he was significantly better than the other top LCP supports like Taki, Elio, or maybe even sometimes Woody, depending on which split it was. I'll also mention Core JJ. I think that Core is still a very good support and he still has a great pairing with Yan, but personally I do think that Core has been not a hyper elite LCS support for the past few years. I think he peaked around 2020 or so and has not quite reached that form since. I also want to briefly explain why I have Life on here. I don't think that in 2025 Life was better than the other LCK supports. I really don't. I do agree that he was absolutely a bottom tier LCK support and that it made sense that he was benched. The one reason why I still have him on this list is because as a 2026 projection list, I do want to call back to the 2024 FPX roster where Dom and Life were a bot duo and they were an extremely exciting duo together. So I think that the only reason why I have Life on my honorable mentions list at all is because he's on the same team as Dom. I think if we get into a world where Peter doesn't look as good and they end up needing to swap Peter out in the same way that Peter was benched in 2025 for Wei, I think there's totally a chance that Life could come in and Dom and Life can go back to doing their crazy 2v2 lane phase thing that they were doing in the LPL. Speaking of the LPL, I can also bring up Perukia, who is also known as Palkia. Perukia's name, he wanted it to be Palkia, but he was forced to change it to Perukia. Probably something related to copyright reasons, I would imagine, but anyways, he was a pretty exciting rookie for EDG, but he's just not the type of support who I think has potential to be making leaps in the LPL. There are some other LPL supports who are very new, who were rookies last year, who I think have potential to be way better than Perukia could end up being, so at least for the second year, I don't want to put Perukia in my top 20. And the very last support who I'll mention, who I think totally has potential to be in top 20, but who I just left them out barely, is 2274, who is the support for CFO. I think overall, as a whole, LCP usually doesn't produce great supports, and especially not the PCS. I think that the only time PCS really had a crazy good support was with Sword Art, and apart from that, most of the other top-level PCS supports tend to fall into more of a decent territory for me. The main reason for that is because a lot of PCS supports are just not very flexible with their game plans. They all play very similar champions. They all tend to favor an engaged playstyle and not be very good at other styles. That's why sometimes I'll even say that I think that Woody is a top tier PCS support, even though I think that Woody is no better than maybe a C tier player, is because at least he's willing to pick some of the more unique range supports to win 2v2 lanes if he has to. That's the type of territory that we're working with for those PCS supports, is that even a player just being decent across the board at champions is enough for me to propel them higher up. 2274 is interesting because not only is he a young rookie, but he also has a crazy champion pool. He's kind of the first LCP support, well, not LCP, he's the first PCS support who I've seen kind of challenge the notion of what champions are pickable. He's willing to slam champions like Taric, Renata, Elise, Bard, Blitzcrank, and on top of that, he can also play the standard picks as well. So I think if he ends up being a promising prospect mechanically and can end up living up to the hype from his CFO Academy days, that combined with his unique champion pool could be enough to push him to being a top tier LCP support. And if that happens, I would not be surprised if he ended up slipping into the top 20, but I haven't seen him play enough for me to make that judgment call just yet, so I'm going to keep him out at least for now. With the honorable mentions done, we can jump right into the top 20, and in 20th, I have Vulcan. Something you will notice is that for the other roles, the LCS and the LEC were relatively equal. There were 2 players from both regions in my top lane list. There was 1 LCS player and 2 LEC players in my jungle list, 2 LEC players and 1 LCS player in my mid list, and 1 each in my bot list. Support is the one that's going to be way different because I do think that the LEC in general has much higher level support play than the LCS does. This even includes when Boostio was in the LCS. I think even if you put Boostio back into the LCS, I would still say that LEC was better with their supports, but Boostio leaving was kind of the final nail in the coffin. I truly think that the LCS support pool just can't keep up anymore. I personally have Vulcan as my best LCS support, and this might be a controversial choice because Vulcan has in the past had very, very difficult years. Essentially, he used to be considered an elite engager in the LCS. He was a very good player. Everybody had a lot of respect for him. But then he had a couple of really down years where he was just not that good. And so a lot of people said, oh, Vulcan is washed. His career is done. He should retire soon. He's no longer a top tier LCS support. I was one of the people who kind of agreed with that train of thought. However, I think that in 2025, he was very, very good again. I was super impressed with his ability to play pretty much all of the champions that existed. And I thought that he was a big reason as to why C9 were able to be a top 2 LCS team for a solid portion of the year. If I was making an LCS team, I would personally rather have Vulcan on my team than players like Core or Seos. So if you're one of those people who still is biased against Vulcan because of the rough couple of years that he had in recent memory, I want you guys to pay extra attention to how Vulcan was playing in 2025 and how he might play in 2026. I also thought that he was insanely good in Kespa Cup. He played an Alistar game in Kespa Cup. I believe off the top of my head it was game 2 against Nongshim, and that Alistar game was one of the best Alistar games I've seen in a while. So I really think Vulcan has it in him to be an insane support still. I think he is my choice for the best LCS support, and that is why I have him in my top 20, even though none of the other LCS or CBLOL supports ended up making it. In 19th, another potentially controversial take, I have Peter. Basically, here's the argument for Peter. If you want to put Peter much higher, the reason why you would want to do so is because Peter was fantastic at Worlds 2025. This placement is not indicative of how he played at Worlds 2025. I agree that he was insane at that tournament. When I did my Worlds 2025 reflection video, I had Peter as the second best support in the tournament right behind Keria. I felt like he really came into his own. He rose as the pressure went up. He was choosing really good engages. He had like a really good Nautilus game, for example. Overall, it was League that I've never seen from him before. But that's the other big thing that I had to consider with Peter, is that for the past few years, he has been an incredibly mediocre support for LCK standards and was arguably bottom 2 or bottom 3 at different portions of 2025 and the years before that. People have to remember that in 2025, Peter was underperforming so much that he ended up getting demoted and benched for Wei, who was the KT Challengers player. If Peter is only playing like a bottom 3, bottom 4 support in LCK for 2 or 3 years straight, I can't let 1 month of excellent play overturn all of that. So even though Worlds 2025 Peter could definitely break into the top 10, I just can't bring myself to do it just yet because I need to see more consistency from him. He needs to prove to me that he can keep that high level for more than just one tournament. If he ends up playing really well in Split 1, my opinion on him will probably completely flip and I'll be 100% on the Peter hype train, but for now, I'm more inclined to believe that Worlds 2025 was kind of just one brief flash of excellence that he won't be able to replicate again. In 18th, I have Crisp. Crisp is going to be playing for, well, no, he's still signed to Weibo, I believe, but he is not going to be the starter, is what I meant to say. Essentially, the deal with Crisp is that he has spent portions of the last half decade being a top tier LPL support, but in the recent past 3 or 4 years, he has not been that. Instead, he has been somewhere middle of the pack, and what happened was that he was underwhelming enough on Top Esports in their Split 2 playoffs run that he ended up getting traded off of Top Esports to Weibo in Split 3. And then Top Esports received Hong. But yeah, Crisp, he was on Top Esports, had a really mediocre first stand. He was one of the players at first stand on Top Esports who super underperformed. Then he came back in Split 2, and all of Top Esports had their issues in Split 2, and they ended up finishing in 5th, 6th, losing to WE. So that was like a super underperformance. And because of that, he was traded to Weibo, and it was at that point that I was surprised that Weibo went with Crisp over Urha, because I thought that Urha played well enough in Split 2 playoffs that he should have continued to play in Split 3. Essentially, heading into 2026, I still have a similar opinion. I think that it's correct for Weibo to want to try Urha instead of Crisp, at least in the beginning. If Urha ends up not being very good at all, if it ended up being that he was just only good for those few weeks in Split 2 playoffs, then by all means bring Crisp in, and I still think Crisp will be a middle to pack LPL support, but that's kind of just it. I don't think Crisp is any better than a middle of the pack LPL support at this point. In 17th, I have Jun, who is the support for Giant X. Jun is kind of a hard one for me to figure out because he was a pretty solid LCK support in my opinion. He was nothing special in the LCK, but he was solid. He was middle of the pack in LCK. Then he goes to the LEC, and on Fnatic he's just completely insane. He elevated the team, was super strong for pretty much his entire tenure over there. And while from the games that I've seen from Jun now, it still feels like he's a player who has the ability to be a top tier LEC support, but I'm just not quite sure because the problem is that Giant X is just not a very inspiring team to watch. So I don't know if Giant X has made Jun a little bit worse, or if Jun is still just as good as he was and is just in a worse situation. But overall, just based on the highs that I've seen from Jun in the past, I still want to push him up and put him on this top 20 list. I still want to assume that if he went back to the LCK, he could still be slightly outside of the top half in the LCK. So that's why I have him on my list, but I'm not going to put him over who I would consider to be kind of the clear top 3 LEC supports. Speaking of which, in 16th, I have Alvaro, who is in my top 3. I think that Alvaro is a fantastic engaged player. He is somebody who, no matter how far behind MKOI got, or no matter how much MKOI struggled throughout the year at international tournaments, it always felt like Alvaro was able to continue to stay locked in and he was able to find good angles for his team. If you need somebody to play a primary engage and kick off your team fight, I think that there is no better support in the West who can do that than Alvaro. Unfortunately, I do think that Alvaro is a little bit limited in his champion pool. I understand that he has the ability to play some range supports. He was pretty solid at Nico. I feel like I remember him playing a couple of good games on Renata. But at the end of the day, even though Nico is a range support, she still falls more under the kind of engager territory. She plays a lot, at least in mid and late game, she plays closer to what your engagers would be doing than what your ranged 2v2 champions would be doing. Nico is somebody who has a dominant 2v2 lane, but outside of lane phase, she functions more like a Nautilus or a Rel or something like that. So I think in terms of playstyle, Alvaro is not the most flexible player. Both of the LEC supports that I have above him, I think are more flexible than him, and that's the main thing that's keeping him out of that territory for me. But I still think that he does have that elite engager skill set, and that's enough for me to push him all the way up this far. In 15th, I have Hung, and if I have this correct, Hung should still be signed to Top Esports. There were some rumors floating around. I don't remember if it was Hong himself who maybe said something on social media or on a stream or something, but it was kind of implied that he didn't think that he was going to be playing in the split, and at surface value that could possibly make sense because he heavily underperformed at Worlds. He played a substantial amount of mediocre or bad games at Worlds and was definitely the worst player on his team, which is saying something because Top Esports as a whole, everybody underperformed. So as an initial knee-jerk gut reaction, it would be pretty easy to say, man, Hong was really trash at Worlds, he should not play. You can also add that onto the fact that this is not the only time this year this has happened, because when he was on Weibo, he was also just not good, and he had to get benched, and that's why Urha came in and played for him instead. I don't think that the reason why Weibo went with Urha in Split 2 playoffs was because they thought Urha would be really good. I think that Urha just happened to be really good, and it was a pleasant surprise, but the main thing was that Hong was underperforming so much that they just had to bench him. So all of that being said, the reason why I still have him so high up is because at the end of the day, he was the LPL Split 3 first team support. He was arguably the best support for that final split when he was on Top Esports, and all of the sins that he committed surrounding that split 3 can't take that split 3 away from him. So I still remember seeing plenty of really good games from Hong on Top Esports. I still believe that he has it in him to be a potentially strong support, especially because I remember him quite fondly from some of his LNG days, but it's also true that it makes sense why he's not playing, and so if somebody wanted to not include Hong on their list at all, it would make sense to me. I wouldn't agree, but it would make sense. In 14th, right above Hong, I have Urha. Urha is that support who I've talked about a couple of times now, who only played a brief stint in LPL Split 2 playoffs, so this rating is basically entirely just a projection. Urha is going to be the starting support for Weibo in Split 1 as far as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure that they're just playing him over Crisp, and in that Split 2 playoffs, he was very, very good, super promising, made a bunch of great engages, made a bunch of good plays, was not falling behind in lane. Basically everything that you would need from a newer support to want to play them more. So I think it makes perfect sense that Weibo are going to go with him. Unfortunately, there's not really much else I can say about him him because he has no prior history that I'm aware of. He was not somebody that was even hyped up as a prospect to begin with prior to his Split 2 playoff stint. I'm very excited about him. I think that he has potential to be very good, but it's all mostly just a vibes-based projection based on the few games that I saw from him. In 13th, I have Career, who's going to be the support for DK. Career is somebody who I didn't really know much about until maybe a month ago or so, and so I wasn't going to be very high on him. I kind of thought that he was just your standard LCK CL support who was getting promoted, but when I saw him play in Kespa Cup, and when I learned more about how he played in the LCK CL, I started to become more excited about him. He is kind of like the LCK equivalent of what I was saying for 2274 earlier. Career is somebody who has a massive champion pool, and he's willing to pick just about any champion that exists if he thinks that it's right for the comp and that it can win them the game. For example, if I pull up Career's match history, so his most recent games played, I can already see right off the bat he has Pyke, Bard, Renata. He even has a LeBlanc support game in there. In Asia Masters, in the very last series that they played, he went stuff like Ashe as well. He was going Gragas. So this guy's champion pool is massive. I think that whenever you have a support who can succeed at the level that Career has succeeded at with those kind of weird champions, it means that the player probably has a lot of potential. And DK as a whole just seemed like a very high upside team to me in general, just because apart from Showmaker, the rest of their core is super young. I think if even one or two of the players on DK end up being crazy hits and end up playing as well as their ceiling might project, the team could be really good. And Career is one of the players who I'm hoping can get there, because if he and Smash, like Smash was always, when he was in LCKCL, he would love to play these duos that could just dominate lane phase, and then he would carry in teamfights later on champions that he had more agency on. So if Smash and Career can figure out some strategies together where they can play those dominant 2v2 lanes that some of the other more standard supports can't really get a grasp on, so we're talking like if you can go a Kalista Renata lane or an Ashe Seraphine lane, stuff like that, those are not lanes that a lot of supports have access to. So if Career can end up doing that, which would help play into some of Smash's strengths, I think that could be fantastic for DK and could be a crazy weapon that they have that other teams don't have. I was also pretty impressed with Career's mechanics overall, so I just think that the future is bright for him, and I'm projecting him to be pretty solid. In 12th, I have Vampire. And if you had told me a year and a half ago that I was going to have Vampire anywhere near a top 20 list, the past me probably would have laughed at you and mocked you, and because Vampire was so bad. Like I need to stress that prior to 2025, Vampire was a player who I perceived almost as a joke, because he would run it down so much, he would make so many bad decisions. I just did not see a future for him, and I did not understand why he kept on finding places on teams. The one thing I forgot to account for is that the entire time that Vampire was running it down, he was also a very new, very young player, and in 2025, he matured a lot, and he became very good. In my opinion on WE, Vampire was arguably a top 3 performing support in the LPL. I would never project him to be top 3 this year, but I think that he had some really high highs. WE's playstyle complemented Vampire a lot, because Vampire, even in past years when he was inting a lot, the main thing is that he would just go for all of these crazy plays, and most of the time it just felt like he was going way too fast and his team wasn't following up and blah blah blah. But the thing with WE is that the entire team were full of psychos. They would all go in, so if Vampire sent it, everybody else on the team would send it, and stylistically it just worked out very well for them. And so they were able to punch above their weight in many different circumstances. That's why they placed as high as 4th in Split 2. So big up to Vampire. Even though I have my biases against him from before, I still want to take his entire year of 2025 and say, okay, maybe Vampire actually can just be very good. I want to rate him highly heading into 2026 and give him another chance to show me what he's got. Some people have already pointed out, just based on how Taeyun looked in Kespa Cup, and there were a few people who were saying this prior to Taeyun going to Nongshim, is that they believed that Taeyun was still not a very good ADC and he was simply being carried by Vampire, which is a really funny sentence to say out loud because, you know, it's Vampire. But Taeyun did in fact not look amazing at Kespa Cup, and I don't have Taeyun in my top 20 bot laners list, so it could potentially be true that Vampire was pulling both of their weight on that WE roster. I would not be super surprised. So if that also helps you to believe that Vampire could be really good, then that's something that's worth mentioning in my opinion. Another thing to mention is that this will be a really big test for Vampire, for, because this is the first time that I think that he's on a really good roster and that he was put on that roster because the team expects him to be really good. So he's on JDG, he's paired with the star 80 carry Gala. If Vampire does not perform and he ends up reverting back to how he looked in 2024, I would not be surprised if Vampire never finds his top tier team again. This is kind of his one shot where he has good pieces around him and he has to prove that his year with WE wasn't a fluke. So I'm excited to see how he does, whether it's a crash and burn or whether he rises to the occasion. But yeah, big surprise for me overall. Initially, I was going to put him in maybe like 19th or 20th, and I just had to look inwards and be honest with myself. And every single day that passed, I moved him a little bit up on my support list, and now he's all the way almost into the top 10. In 11th, I have Kellen. Kellen is another support who tends to get a bad rep. The main reason why is because he was on DK, and during the portion of time that he was on DK, he was scapegoated for a lot of the mistakes that team would make. To be fair, he was making a lot of mistakes. He would have a lot of really bad engages. He would have a lot of these weird moments where he was just semi-AFK in a team fight and he would just die, and people would point it out and be like, what the heck is this guy doing? However, ever since he got off of DK, I actually think that he's been better. Specifically, I really like the pairing that Fear X have going on with the Diablo Kellen lane. I thought that Kellen did a great job at ironing out some of the mistakes, some of the young rookie mistakes that Diablo was making, and he was playing in such a way that really allowed Diablo to express his strengths in teamfights. So I expressed frustrations in prior videos that Fear X were doing basically a full run back. I really wish that they wouldn't, because I want them to put a better team around Diablo, but one of the pieces that I was not disappointed about was their decision to keep Kellen. I wanted Diablo and Kellen to stick together, so I'm really glad that that's happening. I think that it's the right pairing for Diablo. I thought that Kellen did a really good job with that. So again, similar to the same kind of spiel I had for Vampire, if you're somebody who is biased against Kellen because of what he did in prior years, I want you to try to erase that from your memory and look at just how they did in 2025, and because they played well enough in 2025, maybe give them another shot for 2026. Moving into my top 10. In 10th, I have Mako, and he is going to be the support for IG, but he is taking Split 1 off. So he's doing the same thing that Jackie Love is doing, where he's taking Split 1 off, and then he's supposed to return for Split 2. In his stead, we're going to have Jue playing for him instead, and I did not put Jue on my support list or in my honorable mentions list because I was not very impressed with what Jue did in 2025, but I do want to mention really quickly that IG did manage to win Demacia Cup, and the Photic and Jue bot lane looked better than I was expecting. So in hindsight, if you want to put Photic on the honorable mentions ADC list, or if you want to put Jue somewhere on the support list, then by all means. I'm going to stick to my guns and not put him on just because I already have the list that I made, and I just want to trust what I had thought prior to the singular tournament that was played. But either way, Mako is a support who I think is very, very smart. He's definitely not in his prime anymore. He makes a lot more mechanical mistakes than he used to, but it's also true that every single time that Mako is on a team, that team's macro is much better than once he leaves. So he did it with EDG, he did it with Top Esports in 2024, and he did it with IG in 2025. IG were a very smart team in 2025. They would make a lot of good decisions in mid-game that would end up getting them back into games that they were behind, or would end up getting them into the lead if the game was even. And I attribute a lot of that to Mako just because it's happened time and time again with every single roster that Mako is on. I also think that even though he wasn't always consistent in 2025, that the final series that he played against T1, he was the most consistent player on his team. I don't think he was the best player on his team, but I did think that in all 4 games, he played a solid, stable game. So all of that together makes me believe that Mako is still going to be one of the better LPL supports, and I still have a lot of respect for him, even though he's entering the very tail end of his career. In 9th, this one is going to be somewhat of a risky placement for me. I have Missing. Here's essentially my defense for Missing. Missing in 2025, Split 1, he was on JDG, and the JDG roster was supposed to be this crazy super team that was going to be contesting winning the LPL. At the time, they had Ale, Shun, Scout, Pays, and Missing. However, the entire team just completely crumbled. Scout played the worst year of his career, Ale was getting into controversies and was inconsistent, and he ended up getting benched, and then Missing played badly enough in Split 1 that he chose to bench himself. So he was not benched by the team. He was like, I don't think I'm playing well enough, so I'm going to bench myself so that way I can recollect myself and look inwards, and then come back later once I think that I'm finally back to the level where I should be. It should also be noted though that the duration of the time that Missing spent on JDG actually playing, CV Max was the coach for that team, and I know that there are a lot of people who have opinions about CV Max, so if you want to blame some of the underperformance of those players on CV Max, then sure, by all means. I'm not going to do that because I obviously don't know what's going on in the back room. I wasn't there with them, so I can't really make that call. What I do know is that I thought that everybody on JDG had these really big champion pools and they should be able to win draft, draft, and it just felt like they could never win draft when they had CV Max. So at the time, I was kind of like, man, CV Max, he's just not utilizing his player strengths well. So even though Missing underperformed in that first half of the year for 2025, I didn't want to put it on him too harshly. He's now going to be the support for LNG, and it's again a roster that I think is promising. He's going to be paired with 1XN, who's kind of one of the younger LPL ADC talents who I've had my eye on for a while now, for the past couple of years. I think that 1XN could be really good, and I think that Missing is by far the best support 1XN has ever played with. And with all of that being said, all of the 2025 stuff being said, I do want to remind people that the reason why Missing is so high to begin with is because from 2022 to 2024, Missing was a top-tier world-class support. From 2022 to 2024, he was always anywhere from top 1 to top 3 conversations. It depended based on the tournament. Sometimes Kerio was insane, sometimes Lehens was insane, sometimes On was having a really good split, but Missing, he was always in that territory for that multi-year stretch, and just because he played one half of a year badly with a coach who is suspicious at best, that's not going to undermine the 3 years of excellence that he had beforehand. So I still want to have him in my top 10. I want to believe that he can make a full bounce back and be the world-class support he used to be, but at least for 2026, I'm not going to jump the gun right away and say like, Missing, he's going to be back for sure, he's definitely going to be top 5. I'm still only going to put him 9th. I do want to actually see him perform first before I'm willing to be more confident in him, but I want people to be optimistic. If Missing ends up sucking, then that's unfortunate, unlucky I guess. 2025 wasn't a fluke, but I don't want people to go in thinking he's going to suck. I want people to go in with the idea that he can make a full bounce back and have the form that he had in those crazy JDG years. Making it all the way up to 8th, and perhaps this is an overplacement from me, I have Mickey. Even though Mickey was in a rough spot on the Fnatic roster, and even though he's going to an SK roster that is experimental at best and is just going to be a retirement home at worst, essentially, I do think that Mickey was the best player on Fnatic, and I do think that he was the best support in the LEC for essentially the entire duration of the year. Mickey is a very creative player. He's always looking for angles. He's always looking for ways to get back into a game or for ways to push a lead forward. He's got a massive champion pool. He's an innovator. I think if you wanted to move Mickey lower and your justification is that you think that SK is going to suck really badly, then I think that's totally fair. But Mickey has been such a strong Western support for such a long period of time that I still want to keep him on the higher end because I know that he can perform when it matters. And I'm not going to move him down unless it feels like he is just absolutely washed or the team is just going to be a terrible environment. One thing that I want to mention for Mickey, and you'll notice that there wasn't a single other SK player who made it onto any of my lists for any of the other roles. Despite that, I actually have a slightly higher view of SK than most people would have. For a lot of people, the main question marks for the team are the solo laners, so it's Wunder and Leader. People are very skeptical about them. What I'll say for Wunder is that the last time that we saw him in the LEC, he was still the same player that we always know him that we all used to know him as. He's a very reliable weak side player. He's smart, he makes good decisions. I don't think that we've seen any evidence from either Wunder's time on Heretics when the team wasn't that good, or when Wunder was screwing around in the ERL system in 2025. I don't think that we've seen anything from him that makes me believe that he has regressed to a point that he can't recover. Wunder has also always been a player who has been very anti-solo queue. He doesn't like to play solo queue. He instead wants to just kind of like play World of Warcraft or whatever. But he's been going on a pretty crazy solo queue grind. In 2025, he ended up at the very tail end of the year, he started spamming solo queue. He had a super high win rate, made it into a respectable place in mid to high challenger. So Wunder's definitely on the grind. He is taking this completely seriously. He wants to win. If he didn't want to win, he would not play solo queue because that's the type of player that he is. So I think that there is definitely a chance that Wunder can show up and still be the reliable weak side rock that he always has been. And then the other thing is with Leader. People have their issues with Leader where they say that he has an impossible champion pool to work with. He plays way too many volatile mid laners. People will point to Leader's stint on Ruddy Sack in Split 1 of 2025, where that entire Ruddy Sack roster was a disaster and Leader was not playing well at all. However, based on what it sounded like, it seemed like the main issue with that Split 1 Ruddy Sack team was that all of the players had different ideas of what they wanted from the team, and some players were treating it like content and other players were trying to win. Basically, what my main point is that every single player who played on that Split 1 Ruddy Sack roster, I really don't care about it because it was enough of a shit show where it was obvious that some players weren't taking it seriously, that to me it's just kind of a joke split. It's not something that I'm going to factor factor into my analysis. When I'm thinking about leader, what I'm thinking about is the last year that he played in LEC, which was 2023 on Astralis, and in that year, it was the best performing split that Astralis ever had. So on Astralis, leader managed to take them to a tied second place record. They were 6-3, and he was definitely the best player on that roster, at least if my memory serves me correct. I remember thinking that he was the best player on that roster. So essentially, here's the way that it goes. If Wonder ends up being a reliable top laner, which I believe that he can be, and if leader ends up being a highly volatile but potentially high upside electric mid laner, which I believe he can be, then it turns out that Mickey's team environment is not actually as horrendous as people are making it out to be. So I believe that there's still a chance that Mickey will be able to show off his stuff. I think that there's a chance that the team will be good enough that he himself individually will not regress any further. And so for all of those reasons, I still want to believe that Mickey will still be a strong support for 2026, even if SK ends up not placing very well. In 7th, I've got On, and I think that this is going to be a placement that some people will think that I'm going too far with. On, similar to Hung, had a very suspicious Worlds 2025, but beyond that, he also was not good at MSI 2025. So he has now had 2 international tournaments in a row where he has just not been good. If people want to say that that's enough for them, that they want to move on further down, then by all means. But for me, this is my further down. This is me saying that On has played terribly for 2 international tournaments now, and I am punishing him by moving him down further on my list. Because in past years, I would have had On in top 3 territory. I think that he had stints where he was the best in the world. I think he had stints where he was top 2 or top 3. So for me, that is the expectation for On. I think that On has the ability to be top 3, but because he underperformed so heavily at MSI 2025 and Worlds 2025, I'm moving him all the way down to that 7th place spot. When On was at his best, he was a support who could play a very large amount of champions. He was always super creative. He was able to find great engage angles. He could win 2v2 lanes. And overall, he was just a support who did not make a crazy amount of mistakes. That's the main thing that went wrong for him in 2025. It just felt like he was making so many mistakes. He was inting so much internationally, and I don't really know exactly what the problem was, but it was not pretty, and I definitely lost a lot of faith that On can be the type of player who can move into a top 3 realm ever again. But basically, I would say this. I still think that the expectation for On is that he should be a top tier LPL support at least, which explains why I have him so high. But I do think that if he continues to perform badly, he will be on a very, very quick downward spiral. And my patience for him is beginning to run thin. If BLG are expected to win LPL, in my opinion. There are some people who think that AL could do it. I think that BLG should do it. If BLG end up winning LPL, and On goes to a 3rd international tournament and underperforms heavily again, at that point I'm going to be like, On just does not have it anymore, and at that point I'll push him out of my top 10 for sure. But for now, he's still kind of right on the edge, where I'm like, On, I'm looking at you, you're very suspicious, but I still want to remember the highs that you had before, so I'm going to keep you in my top 10 for now. That's kind of where I'm sitting with On at the moment. In 6th, I have Busio, who's going to be the support for KC. Before any KC haters come in and say that I'm placing Busio too high solely because he's on KC, I want to tell you 2 things. 1, I am absolutely not a KC fan. There's plenty of record in the past of me being absolutely not a KC fan. The other thing that I would say is I would implore you to look at my Worlds 2025 support tier list. So back from when Busio was on FlyQuest, I rated Busio disproportionately higher than pretty much every other Western support. I had him on A tier on my support list. So even if Busio had chosen to stay on FlyQuest, I would still have him here in this territory. Essentially for me, the way that it was last year was that there were 2 Western players who I thought were clearly at the level of the elite Eastern players, and those 2 players were Inspired and Busio. I had Inspired in my top 5 performing junglers for 2025, and I had Busio right on the tail end of my top 5 performing supports for 2025 as well. Essentially, my top 5 performing supports and my top 5 projected supports for 2026 are the exact same, except for the player who's in 5th. So the player who's right above Busio, I did not think had a great 2025, but I put him in 5th anyway, so we'll get to him later. But apart from that, this is essentially where I placed him for my 2025 power rankings, is that I would have had Busio in 5th, 6th place territory. Busio is somebody who has been on an absolutely crazy trajectory. He is just improving at an insane pace. When he was on 100 Thieves, he was not very good. Then in 2024 on FlyQuest, he was a solid support, but nothing special. Then in 2025, he took another leap. He took a 3rd-year leap and was a complete monster, was absolutely the best support in the LCS, was absolutely the 2nd best player on that FlyQuest team. Busio is one of those supports who has the ability to play everything. He can play engagers, he can play lane dominant 2v2s, he can play the weird champions like Bard as well. If you need Busio to pick it and you think it'll win you the game, he can play it at an elite level, which is something that almost no other Western players can say at all. I do think that Busio had a little bit of a weaker 2025 Worlds, but that being said, so did pretty much everybody on FlyQuest except for Inspired. I thought that Bwipo, Masu, and Quad underperformed what my Worlds expectations were for them. The other thing I'll mention for Busio, and one of the reasons why I have elected to keep him as high as I have, even though he's off of FlyQuest, is that I believe that the KC roster has a fair amount of potential. I like what KC went with. I think that all 5 players on the team have potential to be really good, so I think that Busio should be able to fit right in and kind of gel with the team right away and get going. My only issue with Busio on the KC team is that I don't think that Masu and Busio were ever a crazy 2v2 laning threat together as a pairing, and Kalist is also an ADC who has struggled in lane phase in the past, so I'm not completely sold that Kalist and Busio will be able to keep up with the other top tier LEC bot lanes, at least in lane phase. I have no issues with Kalist and Busio later in the game. I think that in terms of mid and late game, Kalist and Busio should be the best bot duo. I'm just worried about how their lane phase might look, and I wouldn't be surprised if KC end up losing some games because of that. But apart from that, the KC roster is super promising. I think that Busio is super promising. I personally believed that Busio was the best Western support last year, and so I'm going to have him as the best Western support again. Then moving into my top 5, you may have noticed something by now, but out of all of the roles between LCK and LPL, I think that support is the role where there's the biggest discrepancy between those two regions. So I was mentioning earlier that between LEC and LCS, I think that LEC has a much better support pool than LCS. It's kind of the same deal with LCK and LPL. So if we look at the other roles, in my top 5 for the other roles, I had 3 LCK and 2 LPL in my top lane list. I had 3 LCK and 2 LPL in my jungle list. I had 4 LCK and 1 LPL in my mid list, and I had 3 LCK and 2 LPL in my bot list. My support list is 4 LCK and 1 LPL. But unlike my mid list where it's 4 and 1, my support list is filled with 5 Koreans who all spent most of their career in the LCK. So I think that LCK just produces, at this point, much higher quality supports than the LPL has, and is one of the big reasons why in the mid-2020s that LCK has emerged as the clear best region. So let's go over these supports, and I'll show you guys the order that I have them in. In 5th, I have Lehens. This is going to be Lehens' final year. He announced that after this year, he's going to retire and go to the military, so very sad. This is his swan song, and unfortunately, he's going to have to play a swan song with Nongshim and Taeyun. I wish it could have been better for him. I wish he could have gotten on a better team, but it is what it is. If you are doubting Lehen's placement this high, the reason why you are doing so is because the Nongshim roster was not a great roster, and Lehen's was not super consistent on that team. What I would say to you is essentially like the same thing that I said about Missing, but to a completely different degree. So the deal with Missing is that Missing was very elite from 2022 to 2024, but he underperformed heavily enough in the first half of 2025 that he chose to bench himself. I want people to have more faith in Missing because of how well he did in the years prior to 2025, despite his 2025 performance. So that's what I said for Missing, right? Now we look at Lehen's. Lehen's also, quote unquote, underperformed in 2025 because he wasn't as consistent as people wanted him to be, but he was still one of the best players on a middle of the pack LCK team. So already that's a higher bar than what Missing hit because Missing just completely benched himself. Lehen's was at least still one of the best players on his team. And the other thing I want to say is that while Missing was an elite support for 3 years, Lehen's has been an elite support prior to 2025 for basically like half a decade, okay? Like this guy has been a monster for an extremely prolonged period of time, and for a solid portion in the 2020s, he was the only support in the entire world who could go toe-to-toe with peak Keria. That's something that I want people to keep in mind. The only support who has ever existed while Keria was playing who could compete with Prime Keria and trade spots as the best support in the world was Lehen's. So even though Lehen's is not on a super impressive team for 2026, and he's not coming off of his greatest year ever, I still believe that he is a support with a high enough floor and a high enough ceiling that I still want to push him up this high. I would say that the biggest thing with Lehen's that sets him apart from other supports is that he has a disgustingly large champion pool. If you think that a support like Keria has a large champion pool, you have to keep in mind Lehen's champion pool is even bigger. I know that that sounds hard to believe, but it's like Lehen's champion pool from split to split is just completely on a different level. The amount of champions that he can play at an elite level at any given time is off the charts. One of the things for Keria, and in Karia's defense, he has been getting better at this. But one of the problems with Karia is that he has never been a world-class support on some of the engaged champions. Lehens did not have that problem. Not only did Lehens have his crazy unique picks and the ability to play pretty much anything, but he also had all of the engaged champions in his pool as hyper elite champions for him as well. So that's the main reason why I say that Lehens' champion pool, at least the functionally hyper elite champion pool, was bigger than Karia's when both of them were in their primes. But basically, that's my argument for Lehens. He was insane for like half a decade. He still has a massive champion pool. He didn't even underperform that much in 2025. I think that people are overreacting to his 2025 play a little bit. So for me, he's definitely still in my top 5 projections. I still have him over Busio. I still have him over On. And I really hope that even though he's on a team that I don't personally believe in, I really hope that he can do something special for his final year, because I would hate for a support who's as great as Lehens to go out with a whimper instead of a bang. In 4th, I have the HLE support Delight. Delight is also another LCK support who has been fantastic in the past. He is somebody who, in my opinion, in multiple splits has held the title of best engager in the world. Essentially, he's kind of the equivalent of like an LCK Alvaro. I mean, it would be more fair to say that Alvaro is more of an LEC Delight, but it's the same kind of idea where he's got super hyper elite world-class engaging skills, and he's not as great at the other things. Delight did have some problems in 2025 though. I think that especially towards the tail end of 2025, Delight began to over-engage a little bit. He had a little bit of main character syndrome where every single good early game play and every single bad early game play that HLE would make, Delight was in the center of it. So that's something that I'm slightly concerned about, is if he can keep it in his pants a bit. But I think Delight has been an insanely good support for a long time, and I think it should come as no surprise that he makes it into my top 5. In 4th, the lone LPL support who managed to, or not 4th, in 3rd, the lone LPL support who managed to make it here, but it's not even really an LPL support because he played in the LCK for so long. I have Kyle. Kyle has really bloomed into a brilliant support. When he was in the LCK, he was no better than maybe 5th or 6th best in the region, but ever since he got to LPL, he has been on a complete tear. The main thing for Kyle in the LPL is that he has gotten a much larger champion pool. I think that in both Split 2 and in Worlds, he had effectively a workable champion pool of anywhere from like 12 to 15 champions, which is something that is very rare for support players. Support players who have champion pools that big would include people like Karia, Lehens, and maybe Busio. And apart from that, there's pretty much nobody else. I mean, like, it's just kind of those 4. I think there's a chance that players like Career and 2274 could get in there, but the main thing with those players is that they are just simply not at the level that these other players are. It's very hard to find players who are good at everything and also still top tier, and Kyle is one of those. I heard rumors that Gen G entertained the idea of getting Kyle in this offseason. I have no idea if it's true, but that is just what I've heard, is that they considered the idea of getting Kyle over Duro. They ended up not doing it, whether it's because Kyle chose not to and he wanted to stay with AL, or if it's because Gen G decided that Duro was going to be a better fit. Either way, it doesn't really matter, but Kyle should absolutely be insane. He's still going to be with a team that should be perceived as a top 2 team in LPL and a top 5 team in the world. The one question mark I have for Kyle, and the reason why I ended up putting number 2 where I put him, is because in Split 3 regular season, AL was struggling a little bit, and I thought that the 2 main reasons why they were struggling was because Shanks was underperforming and Kyle was underperforming. So if you remember in my mid list, I pushed Shanks all the way down to 6, even though I believe that Shanks has the potential to go higher. I pushed him all the way down to 6 because not only did he underperform in Split 3, but he also couldn't really get it together for Split 3 playoffs or for Worlds was the big one. Kyle was in a similar position heading into Worlds, where I would have been like, okay, Kyle, he was insane in Split 1 and Split 2 in MSI, but then he fell off, and I would have had him maybe like in 4th or 5th. But unlike Shanks, Kyle actually played very well at Worlds 2025. So he managed to make a full recovery. He was back to the insane player that he was before. He was doing some disgusting things in Swiss stage. He played a pretty good series against T1. So Kyle, he restored faith in me that he still got it, and that Split 3 regular season was just kind of a low light for him. Whereas for a player like Shanks, I still need to see him play well, because he has not played well since MSI ended. So yeah, slight little bump down for Kyle because of that stint in Split 3 where he wasn't playing well, but I still think that he's going to be great. I still think he's going to be elite, so that's why he's in my top 3. In number 2, I have the support for Gen G, Duro. Duro is a really interesting support to me, because heading into 2025, I thought that it was going to be the type of situation where Gen G was going to be great in spite of Duro. I thought that Keen, Canyon, Chovy, and Ruler would have to kind of carry Duro to their top results. And in Split 1, it was kind of like that. In Split 1, Duro was roughly the support who I thought he was going to be. He was a middle of the pack LCK support and definitely the worst player on the team. And then Genji ended up finishing that split in second. Then in Split 2, Duro made a jump where he became a very solid player. I still didn't think he was excellent. I still thought that he was arguably the worst player on the team, but it was definitely a jump where he became very good. Then in Split 3, he took another jump where at this point, I just think that Duro is world-class, elite level. He has some champions where he's the best in the world. For example, I think that his Blitzcrank is the best in the world by a very large margin. I think that Duro is pretty solid on most of the champions that are meta. I think that it's very rare that Duro has a bad game. He does have bad games. He had some bad games in semifinals against KT, for example, but at this point, I kind of view Duro as one of the more consistent performers on Genji. I think that players like Canyon, Chovy, and Ruler tend to have weaker games more often than Split 3 Duro did. So at this point, I wouldn't even say that I think that Duro is the worst player on the team anymore. I think that the player on Genji who I have the most question marks about is Canyon. So Duro, to me, he is now at a position where he is absolutely not a weak link for the team. He absolutely deserves his spot on a top tier world-class team. And I'm really happy that Genji made the call that they did to go with him. It was an insane progression from him. And if he ends up continuing to make leaps of improvement, then he could even be contesting best in the world. However, despite that, number one on my list, and quite frankly, it was never a question. I always knew that he was going to be number one on my list. It's Keria. Keria at this point is the greatest support of all time. There was a solid portion of time where I wasn't sure if it was going to be Keria or Mako, but 2025 sealed the deal for me. Mako is now second on my list. Keria is first. I think everybody knows the deal with Keria at this point. He is the best ranged support player in the world by a pretty large margin. In past years, he did have flaws where he wasn't that good on specific engaged champions, but year after year, he is getting better and better at them. And now I would say that he is good at all of them and great at some of them. So I don't even think that you can even pin the engaged thing as a weakness anymore. I think that he's evolved past that. He is an innovator, so he has single-handedly shifted the way that everybody has played the game before. The main one that comes to mind would be 2023 Spring, where he was playing all of the marksman support. He was the only person who was playing them. Nobody really took it seriously. Then he started playing really well in them, and everybody was like, holy shit, this is going to be the meta. And then the entire world transformed into a marksman support meta for that split until the point where Riot nerfed it. So not only is Keria the best in the world at range champions, not only is he an innovator, not only has he stripped himself of the one major weakness that he's had in the past, on top of all of that, he was by far the best performing support in 2025 in my opinion. I thought that, like, he was personally my MVP at MSI 2025. Even though T1 lost MSI 2025, I thought that Keria was the best performing player at the tournament. He was my MVP again actually, no, it's not true. I think I had Faker as my Worlds MVP, but I still thought that Keria was the best support at Worlds 2025. So Keria is kind of the one player in the support category who eclipses the label of support, because usually, I think that most people would agree with this, usually the level of support players tends to be a little bit lower than the level of the rest of the roles. I think it is not uncommon in the past to see a top 10 players list and have supports not be on the list. Keria is the one exception to this, and he has been an exception to this for basically half a decade now, where he is the only player who, I mean, maybe not the only player, but he is certainly the only player in the last decade at least, who is a support and has held the title of being the absolute best player in the world for an extended period of time. That to me is just insane. I think that Keria is currently at a level that the other supports can't touch. I think there's even an argument that you could make that at this point he's the second greatest player of all time, right behind Faker. So yeah, even though the support list has a lot of weird stuff, there were a lot of perceived top level supports like Lehens, On, and Missing who underperformed for the year. There are a lot of very interesting new players like Career, Urha, 2274. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on with the support list and a lot of ways in which I think that people may disagree with what I have, but the one thing that I think everybody should have on their list is Keria as their clear number one. So that's going to do it for me. That's my support list. And this was the final list that I'm going to make before the 2026 season starts. I don't know if this video is going to come out before or after my final two power rankings videos for the regions, which are over on my second channel. The only two regions I have left to go at the time that I'm doing this recording at least is CB LOL and LCP. XP. There's definitely a chance that I post both of those before this video ever gets out because this video has way more editing to it, but regardless, if you watched this video and if you watched the other 4, then thank you for watching the series. I hope you all enjoyed it. This is something that I want to continue to do basically every single year from here on out. I want to make a top 20 players per role heading into 2020X whatever season. It was definitely a really big grind for me. It was super intimidating knowing that I was going to have to talk about 100 different players spending multiple minutes on each, but I managed to get it through. We managed to get all the videos done right before the cutoff hit. The split starts on the 14th. I would not be surprised if this video ends up going out on like the 13th or even the 14th right before the game start, but I do want to try to get this out before the season actually starts, so hopefully you guys are seeing this before then. If you want to support me and my channel more, you can check out my Patreon. The link for that will be in the description. I have multiple tiers, each of them with varying amounts of benefits. If you subscribe to the $10 tier, I'll even draw you a custom Poro drawing, which will be showing on this end screen here, which is currently on the screen. But with that, that's everything I have for you this time. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!